The one rain pounded against the cracked glass of the underground clinic on South State Street when the city's most feared man bled out on the linoleum floor. Dr. Harrison Caldwell backed away, dropping his scalpel, his oath completely forgotten in the face of cartel retaliation. He refused to save him, but a disgraced surgical resident with nothing left to lose picked up that discarded blade. In 3 hours, she didn't just save a monster's life, she irrevocably shackled her fate to his. Neon light flickered relentlessly above the triage station of St. Jude's Free Clinic, casting a sickly greenish pallor over the waiting room. Chicago's Lower West Side was unforgiving on a Friday night, and the clinic was the final sanctuary for those who couldn't afford the exorbitant emergency room fees at Northwestern Memorial. Nevi Brown wiped a smudge of grease and betadine from her forehead with the back of her wrist, her blue scrubs damp with the sweat of a grueling 14-hour shift. Just 6 months ago, Neve had been the top cardiothoracic surgical resident at Rush University Medical Center. Her hands were considered a once-in-a-generation gift, but a fabricated malpractice claim, orchestrated by an arrogant attending physician covering up his own fatal mistake, had stripped her of her license, her reputation, and her future. Now, at 28, she was relegated to patching up knife wounds and stitching lacerations for cash under the table, working beneath Dr. Harrison Caldwell, a washed-up general practitioner whose medical license was barely kept intact by a fragile web of bribes and a crippling gambling addiction. Thunder rattled the clinic's reinforced windows. Nevier was organizing a tray of expired Medtronic surgical sutures when the heavy steel doors of the clinic did not just open, they were blown off their hinges. 4 men surged into the reception area, bringing the brutal, freezing Chicago rain with them. They were dressed in ruined Armani suits, their faces grim, their hands gripping matte black firearms. Between them, they carried a 5th man. He was tall, powerfully built, and completely unresponsive, his dark wool overcoat drenched in a terrifying volume of crimson. "Where is the doctor?" roared the man at the front. He was a broad-shouldered enforcer with a jagged scar running down his jawline, Matteo Ricci, though Nevaeh didn't know his name yet. She only knew the type. These weren't street thugs. These were the ghosts that haunted the Gold Coast, the men who owned the judges and the docks. Dr. Caldwell emerged from the back office, clutching a half-empty mug of stale coffee. He took one look at the bleeding man on the stretcher, then at the men holding the guns, and all the color drained from his face. "Put him on table 1, Nevaeh ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. Her training kicked in, overriding the primal fear that paralyzed Caldwell. She rushed toward the trauma bay, snapping on a pair of latex gloves. "I need oxygen, large-bore IVs, and 2 units of O-negative right now." The men slammed the injured man onto the stainless steel examination table. As the harsh overhead examination lights hit his face, Nevaeh's breath hitched. Even unconscious, the man possessed an aura of terrifying authority. Sharp cheekbones, a strong, aristocratic jawline shadowed with dark stubble, and a brutal stillness that commanded the room. This was Vincent Romano, the undisputed head of the Romano Syndicate, the most ruthless organized crime family in the Midwest. "Heat? He took 2 rounds to the chest and 1 to the abdomen from the O'Bannon crew," Matteo snarled, grabbing Caldwell by the collar of his white coat and shoving him toward the table. "Fix him. If he dies, everyone in this building dies with him." Caldwell stared down at Vincent's shredded torso. The Welch-Allen vitals monitor, which Nevi had hurriedly hooked up, began to shriek a frantic, erratic rhythm. Vincent's blood pressure was tanking. The wounds were catastrophic. 1 bullet had clearly missed the heart but shattered a rib, while the abdominal wound was pumping a steady, dark rhythm that indicated a severed artery. I can't," Caldwell stammered, stepping backward. His hands shook violently. This is Vincent Romano, the O'Bannons. If they find out I saved him, they'll skin me alive. I don't have the equipment for this. He needs a level 1 trauma center." "You're not sending him to a hospital so the feds can arrest him," Matteo barked, drawing a Glock 19 and pressing the barrel directly against Caldwell's temple. "You operate, now." "I refuse!" Caldwell screamed, his voice cracking in terror. He threw his hands up, dropping the trauma shears Neva had handed him. "Shoot me! It's faster than what Liam O'Bannon will do to me. I won't touch him." The enforcer's finger tightened on the trigger. The room descended into a breathless, fatal silence. Nevaeh looked at the dying man on the table. She looked at Caldwell, cowering against the medical cabinets. She knew exactly what it meant to save a man like Vincent Romano. It meant crossing an invisible line into the underworld, painting a target on her own back. But as the monitor's frantic beeping began to slow into a flatline rhythm, Nevaeh saw only a patient bleeding to death. She walked around the table, kicked Caldwell's dropped shears out of the way, and shoved Mateo's gun arm aside with astonishing force. "Get your gun out of my sterile field!" Nevaeh snapped, her green eyes blazing with a fierce, reckless fire. She grabbed a fresh scalpel from the tray. "Caldwell is useless. If you want your boss to live, step back and let me work." Mateo stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of this petite, exhausted woman. "You're a nurse. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon," Nevaeh lied, or rather, resurrected the truth. "And you have exactly 4 minutes before his brain goes anoxic. Now, back the hell up." Silence gripped the trauma bay, save for the mechanical wail of the vitals monitor and the torrential rain lashing against the brick exterior. Neva moved with the precision of a concert pianist. The hesitation that crippled Caldwell was entirely absent in her. This was her domain. The chaos of severed tissue and failing organs was the only language that made sense to her anymore. "Suction," Nevaeh commanded. Caldwell stood frozen in the corner, whimpering. Navy didn't wait. She grabbed the suction tubing herself, handing it to Mateo. "Hold this exactly here," she instructed the Mafia enforcer. "Do not move your hand. Do not flinch." Mateo, a man who had ended dozens of lives, swallowed hard as he looked into the cavernous ruin of his boss's chest. But he obeyed, holding the plastic tube steady while it slurped away the pooling blood. Nevaeh swiftly prepped the chest for a thoracotomy. The bullet had cracked the fourth rib and penetrated the pleural cavity. She needed to relieve the tension pneumothorax before it crushed his heart. Grabbing a heavy striker bone saw from the emergency surgical kit, a luxury item Caldwell had bought on the black market and never used, Neva powered it on. "What are you doing to him?" one of the other thugs yelled, stepping forward. "I'm opening his chest!" Nevaeh yelled back over the screech of the saw. "Unless you'd prefer he suffocates on his own blood." She cut through the sternum, dropping the saw and inserting a Finocchio retractor to crank the rib cage open. The sheer physical effort made her muscles burn. Once open, the terrifying reality of Vincent's injuries was exposed. His lung was lacerated, and the lower lobe of his liver was completely shattered by the abdominal round. Blood was everywhere. It painted Nevaeh's scrubs, soaked through her double-layered gloves, and pooled on the linoleum in a morbid halo. "His pressure is 60/40 and dropping," Mateo read from the monitor, panic finally seeping into his gravelly voice. "He's slipping away." "I need to clamp the hepatic artery," Nevaeh muttered, mostly to herself. Her fingers plunged blindly into the slick, dark warmth of Vincent's abdominal cavity. She was operating completely on tactile sensation, her mind calculating the anatomy. "Where is it? Come on, come on!" Her fingers brushed against a thick, pulsing cord. "Got it!" She clamped the artery, temporarily halting the massive hemorrhage. "Pass me the Proline sutures, the blue pack on the tray, now!" For the next 2 hours, the underground clinic transformed into a battleground between life and death. Nevaeh stitched the lacerated lung, packed the shattered liver with hemostatic gauze, and meticulously repaired the damaged blood vessels. She worked with an almost terrifying intensity, her eyes locked onto the microscopic movements of her needle. She ignored the heavily armed cartel soldiers pacing the room. She ignored Caldwell's frantic pacing by the door. At the 90-minute mark, the Welch-Allen monitor began a steady rhythmic beep. Vincent's blood pressure began to stabilize. Neva exhaled a breath she felt she'd been holding since the door crashed open. She began the grueling process of closing him up, suturing the muscle and fascia before finally stapling the skin. When she placed the final dressing over his chest, she stepped back, her knees suddenly trembling with adrenaline withdrawal. She stripped off her bloody gloves, tossing them into a biohazard bin. "He's stabilized," Neve said, her voice hoarse. She leaned against the steel counter, exhausted beyond measure. "The internal bleeding has stopped, but he lost a massive amount of fluids. He needs antibiotics, constant monitoring, and heavy pain management. If he catches an infection, all of this was for nothing." Matteo lowered the bloody suction tube, staring at Neve with a mixture of disbelief and deep reverence. "You saved him. The Reaper came for Vincent Romano, and you chased him out of the room." Before Neve could respond, a low, agonizing groan escaped the operating table. Neve rushed to Vincent's side, shining a penlight into his eyes to check his pupillary response. As the bright beam hit his face, Vincent's dark, obsidian eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with pain and morphine, but a lethal, razor-sharp awareness still lurked beneath the haze. His massive, blood-stained hand suddenly shot up, wrapping around Neve's wrist with surprising bruising strength. Neve froze. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. Vincent stared up at her. He didn't see a tired nurse or a disgraced doctor. He saw the fire, the competence, and the sheer defiance that had kept him tethered to the mortal coil. His gaze raked over her face, memorizing every contour, every rebellious lock of dark hair escaping her surgical cap. "Who are you?" Vincent rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper that sent a strange shiver down Neve's spine. "I'm the one who just bought you a second chance," Neve replied, keeping her voice steady despite the hammer-pounding of her heart. She gently but firmly pried his fingers off her wrist. "Don't waste it." Vincent's eyes held hers for a fraction of a second longer, something dark and possessive stirring in their depths, before the sedatives dragged him back under. By 6 a.m., the storm over Chicago had broken, leaving behind a cold, gray dawn. St. Jude's Clinic looked like a slaughterhouse. Dr. Caldwell, who had spent the entire surgery cowering in his office, finally emerged, running a hand over his balding head. He looked at Vincent, who was now hooked up to a mobile IV pole, breathing steadily under heavy sedation. "You're crazy," Caldwell hissed at Neve, grabbing her arm. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? Liam O'Bannon is going to tear this city apart looking for him when he finds out Romano survived and that it happened here. We're dead. We are both dead." "I did my job, Harrison," Neve retorted sharply, yanking her arm away. "Something you forgot how to do a long time ago." "My men are scrubbing the security footage," Matteo interrupted, stepping between them. He had swapped his ruined jacket for a clean one, brought by another soldier. "No one outside this room knows Vincent was brought here. As far as the streets are concerned, the boss is missing." "Good. Great," Caldwell stammered, backing toward the door. "Then take him. Get him out of my clinic. We're closed. You were never here." Matteo pulled out his Glock again, not pointing it, but holding it loosely at his side in a way that screamed lethality. "We are leaving. We have a secure safe house in Gold Coast. But she," Matteo pointed the barrel directly at Neve, "is coming with us." Neve's blood ran cold. "Excuse me?" "You said it yourself, Doc," Matteo said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "He needs constant monitoring, antibiotics, pain management. We can't bring a hospital doctor into our inner circle. They talk. You're off the grid. You already have his blood on your hands. You're our private physician now." "I have a life," Neve protested, backing away. "I saved him. We're even. You can't just kidnap me." Matteo chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. "Kidnap is an ugly word. Think of it as a highly lucrative, non-optional job offer. Besides, Caldwell is right. If Liam O'Bannon finds out a rogue surgeon pieced Vincent back together, you won't make it to your car tonight. With us, you're protected. The Romano family pays its debts." Before Neve could argue further, two of the massive enforcers stepped up beside her, boxing her in. It wasn't a request, it was an absolute mandate. Within 10 minutes, Vincent was carefully loaded into the back of a modified, armored black Mercedes Sprinter van. Neve was shoved into the back alongside him, surrounded by millions of dollars in portable medical equipment and 3 heavily armed mobsters. As the van sped away from the clinic, navigating the slick, wet streets of Chicago, Nevi stared at the unconscious Mafia boss lying on the makeshift gurney. The rhythmic beep of the portable heart monitor filled the cramped space. She had spent the last 6 months trying to disappear, trying to fade into the miserable background of a ruined career. Instead, she had just tethered her soul to the apex predator of the city's criminal empire. An hour later, the van descended into the subterranean garage of a sprawling, heavily fortified penthouse building overlooking Lake Michigan. Vincent was transferred to a lavish master bedroom that had been hastily converted into a high-tech recovery ward. For 3 days, Nevaeh didn't sleep. She fought a relentless war against infection, fever, and the sheer trauma Vincent's body had endured. She administered broad-spectrum antibiotics, changed dressings, and monitored his vitals with a hawk's vigilance. On the evening of the 4th day, the fever finally broke. Nevaeh was sitting in a velvet armchair near the bed, her eyes closed, exhaustion pulling her into a shallow doze, when a deep, commanding voice shattered the silence. "You look like hell." Nevaeh's eyes snapped open. Vincent was awake. He was propped up slightly against the silk pillows, his bare chest heavily bandaged, but the color had returned to his face. The hazy vulnerability of the clinic was gone. In its place was a sharp, calculating intelligence that felt as dangerous as a loaded gun. Nevaeh sat up straight, crossing her arms defensively. "And you look like a man who shouldn't be speaking. Your lungs are still healing." Vincent ignored the medical advice. He turned his head slowly, taking in the room, and then fixing his intense gaze on her. "Matteo told me what happened at the clinic. He told me the other doctor, Caldwell, refused to touch me. He left me to die." "He was terrified of the O'Bannons," Nevaeh said flatly. "And you weren't," Vincent countered, his dark eyes narrowing in genuine curiosity. "I was more terrified of letting a patient die on my table," Nevi replied, lifting her chin. "A body is a body. A pulse is a pulse. I don't care about your mafia politics. I care about the oath I took." Vincent let out a low, raspy chuckle that quickly turned into a wince of pain. An oath. How noble. "Matteo did some digging on you, Nevaeh Brown. He found out why a surgeon with hands like yours was working in a slum." Nevaeh's breath hitched. A spike of defensive anger shot through her. "That's none of your business." "You were framed," Vincent stated, his tone chillingly matter-of-fact. "Dr. Elliot Sterling butchered a bypass surgery at Rush Medical, blamed the resulting hemorrhage on your post-op care, and used his connections on the board to have your license revoked. You lost your career, your apartment, and your fiancé left you when the scandal hit." Nevaeh gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles turning white. To hear the destruction of her life recited so casually by a cartel boss made her feel physically sick. "Are you trying to intimidate me? Because if you are, you're wasting your breath. I have nothing left to lose." "I'm not trying to intimidate you, Nevaeh," Vincent said softly. The sudden drop in his volume was more terrifying than a shout. He reached over with his good arm, pulling open the drawer of the mahogany nightstand. He tossed a thick manila envelope onto the edge of the bed. "Look inside." Hesitantly, Nevaeh stood up and reached for the envelope. She opened the flap and pulled out a stack of documents. Her eyes widened. It was a signed confession from Dr. Elliot Sterling, admitting full culpability for the botched surgery and detailing exactly how he had framed Nevaeh. Attached to it was an official reinstatement letter from the Illinois Medical Board, fully restoring her surgical license. Nevaeh's hands began to shake. How did you get this?" "I am Vincent Romano," he said simply, as if that explained how he could bend reality to his will. Sterling was quite eager to confess after a brief conversation with Matteo. Tears pricked the corners of Nevaeh's eyes, a confusing whirlwind of profound relief and creeping horror. "You tortured him." "I persuaded him," Vincent corrected, his eyes locking onto hers with magnetic intensity. "You saved my life, Nevaeh. I don't leave debts unpaid. Your name is cleared. You can walk out of that door right now, go back to your hospital, and resume your perfect, legitimate life." Nevaeh stared at the papers. This was it. Everything she had prayed for over the last 6 grueling months. She looked at the door. Freedom was right there, but as she looked back at Vincent, she saw the trap. "But," Neve whispered, knowing there was a catch. Vincent's lips curled into a faint, dangerous smile. "But Liam O'Bannon knows I'm alive. He knows a rogue doctor saved me. He doesn't know your name yet, but he will. If you walk out that door, you are completely unprotected. The hospital won't save you from a car bomb. The police won't save you from a sniper." Neve's blood ran cold. "You're saying I have to stay here?" "I'm saying," Vincent shifted, leaning closer, the predatory aura completely overpowering his physical weakness, "that the only safe place for you in the city is by my side. You belong to me now, Neve, not as a prisoner, but as my personal physician and my partner." He reached out, his warm, rough fingers gently brushing the side of her jaw. A jolt of electricity shot through Neve's veins, a terrifying cocktail of fear and undeniable attraction. "I'll give you the world," Vincent whispered, his voice dark and hypnotic. "But you have to give me your soul." Sunlight pierced the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Gold Coast penthouse, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported Italian marble. High above the sprawling grid of Chicago, the world felt entirely disconnected from the gritty reality of St. Jude's Clinic. Navy Brown stood by the glass, clutching a mug of black coffee, watching the morning traffic crawl along Lakeshore Drive. 3 weeks had passed since the night she opened Vincent Romano's chest. 3 weeks of living in absolute luxury, entirely cut off from her former life. She had not accepted Vincent's offer right away. In fact, she had thrown the envelope containing her exoneration right back at him. But reason and a deep-seated survival instinct eventually overruled her pride. Liam O'Bannon had indeed firebombed St. Jude's Clinic 2 days after the surgery. Dr. Harrison Caldwell had barely escaped with his life and was now in hiding. If Neve had gone back to her damp apartment in Logan Square, she would already be in a morgue. Her life now existed within the impenetrable fortress of the Romano Syndicate. She had unrestricted access to a state-of-the-art medical suite that Matteo had installed in the penthouse's east wing, funded by offshore accounts and equipped with gear that rivaled Rush University's intensive care unit. "You're supposed to be resting," Neve said, not turning around as she heard the distinct heavy gait of Vincent entering the expansive living room. Vincent ignored her reprimand, walking over to the custom mahogany bar to pour himself a glass of sparkling water. He moved with a measured, deliberate stiffness. The brutal incision bisecting his chest was healing perfectly under Neve's meticulous care, but the muscle tissue still protested against sudden movements. He wore a pair of tailored dark trousers and a loosely buttoned black dress shirt that did nothing to hide the stark white bandages beneath. "Rest is a luxury for men who don't have a bounty on their heads," Vincent replied, his voice a low, resonant rumble. He walked up behind her, stopping just inches away. His sheer physical presence was a gravitational pull, emitting a warmth that made the tiny hairs on the back of Neve's neck stand up. "Besides, I have a syndicate to run. The ports down at Calumet River are stalling. O'Bannon is trying to choke my supply lines while he thinks I'm weakened." Neve finally turned, nearly colliding with his broad chest. She looked up into those dark, calculating eyes. "You are weakened, Vincent. You lost over 3 liters of blood. Your liver is barely functioning at 70%. If you exert yourself, you'll tear the internal sutures, and all my hard work will be ruined." Vincent reached out, his knuckles lightly grazing her cheek. The gesture was shockingly tender for the man who commanded an army of killers. "I won't let your work go to waste, Neve. You gave up everything to keep me breathing." "I didn't give up anything," Neve countered, though her voice trembled slightly under his touch. She stepped back, preserving her professional boundary, a line that was blurring more and more every day. "I was forced into this." "Were you?" Vincent challenged softly, a dangerous smirk playing on his lips. "I gave you your license back. You could have called the FBI. You could have entered witness protection, but you didn't. You stayed." Neve crossed her arms, defensive. "I stayed because your goons would have dragged me back anyway." "Matteo follows my orders," Vincent said, taking a step closer, completely shattering her safe distance. And I explicitly told him that if you walked out that door, no one was to stop you. Yet, here you are. He leaned in, his lips hovering dangerously close to her ear, the scent of sandalwood and expensive clean linen wrapped around her senses. You stayed because, for the first time in your life, you feel valued. You stayed because the sterile halls of a hospital bore you. You want the fire, Nevaeh, and you know I'm the only one who can give it to you. Before Nevaeh could form a biting retort, the heavy oak doors of the living room burst open. Mateo strode in, his face pale, gripping a suppressed Sig Sauer P226. Boss, we have a massive problem. Vincent's demeanor instantly shifted from seductive predator to warlord. He stepped away from Nevaeh, his posture straightening, despite the pain it undoubtedly caused him. Report! Arthur Mitchell! Mateo spat the name like poison. He flipped. He sold the penthouse security codes to the O'Bannon crew. They bypassed the biometric scanners in the lobby elevator. We have heavily armed hostiles coming up the private shaft right now. Nevi's heart slammed against her ribs. The penthouse, her gilded cage, was no longer safe. How many? Vincent asked, perfectly calm. At least a dozen. Professional hitters, Mateo said, tossing an extra magazine onto the glass coffee table. My men are holding the stairwells, but the elevator opens directly into the foyer. We need to move you to the panic room, now. I don't hide in boxes, Mateo, Vincent snarled, reaching under the bar and retrieving a matte black Glock 17. He racked the slide with clinical precision. Vincent, you can't fight! Neva yelled, her medical instincts warring with her sheer terror. If you take blunt force trauma to your abdomen, you will hemorrhage internally within minutes. Vincent turned to her, his eyes cold and absolute. If O'Bannon's men get into this room, my internal bleeding will be the least of your concerns. He grabbed Nevia by the wrist, pulling her behind the massive marble kitchen island. Stay down. Do not move unless I tell you to. Gunfire shattered the serene quiet of the morning. The reinforced steel doors of the private elevator were blown entirely off their tracks by a shaped C4 charge, sending a shockwave through the penthouse that rattled the expensive artwork on the walls. Nevia curled into a tight ball behind the marble island, covering her ears as the deafening roar of automatic weapons erupted in the foyer. The smell of cordite and pulverized drywall instantly choked the air. Cover the left flank, Mateo roared over the din, returning fire with measured lethal precision. Nevaeh peeked around the edge of the marble counter. It was absolute chaos. 4 men dressed in tactical gear were laying down heavy, suppressing fire from the ruined elevator bank. The beautiful, pristine penthouse was being shredded into confetti. Glass rained down from the shattered floor-to-ceiling windows, letting the freezing Chicago wind howl into the room. Vincent was a terrifying sight. Despite his severe injuries, he moved with lethal fluidity. He didn't fire wildly. Every pull of his trigger was a calculated execution. He dropped 2 of the assailants before they even made it past the foyer rug. But the sheer volume of incoming fire was overwhelming. Suddenly, a stray bullet struck the marble island inches from Nevia's head, showering her hair with sharp, blinding dust. She screamed, ducking back down. Hearing her scream, something feral snapped inside Vincent. He abandoned his cover behind a reinforced pillar and stepped directly into the line of fire to draw their attention away from the kitchen. Over here, you Irish bastards! Vincent roared, firing a rapid succession of shots that dropped a third hitman. But the maneuver cost him. One of the surviving attackers aimed a shotgun and fired. The buckshot missed Vincent's head, but the concussive force of the blast tore through the wooden bar beside him, sending a heavy, jagged piece of shrapnel directly into Vincent's side. Vincent staggered, dropping to one knee with a sharp, agonizing grunt. His hand instantly went to his abdomen. Dark crimson began to blossom through his white bandages. "Vincent!" Neve screamed, abandoning all reason. She scrambled out from behind the safety of the marble island, crawling across the glass-strewn floor toward him. "Get back!" Vincent choked out, his face contorting in pure agony. "Neve, stay down!" But she didn't listen. She slid on her knees, grabbing him by the collar and dragging him backward behind the heavy, bulletproof oak desk in his study. The air above them snapped and hissed with flying lead. Matteo provided covering fire, systematically advancing on the remaining two gunmen. "I need 2 minutes!" Matteo yelled. "Keep him breathing, Doc!" Neve ripped open Vincent's ruined shirt. The surgical site had held, but the wooden shrapnel was lodged deep in his right flank, perilously close to his kidney. He was losing blood fast. "You stubborn, arrogant idiot!" Neve sobbed, her hands shaking as she clamped her palms down hard over the wound, applying maximum pressure. "I told you not to exert yourself!" Vincent looked up at her, his breathing shallow, a grim, blood-stained smile on his face. He reached up, his bloody hand gently touching her cheek. "I told you. I wouldn't let them hurt you." "Shut up and stay awake," Neve commanded, tears streaming down her face. She looked around frantically. She didn't have her medical bag, she didn't have sutures, clamps, or even clean gauze. She only had her bare hands in her desperation. "Listen to me, Neve," Vincent whispered, his voice losing its thunderous power. He grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly weak. If I don't make it out of this room, there's a jet waiting at O'Hare. Matteo has the tail number. It will take you to Switzerland. You'll be safe." "I am not going to Switzerland," Neve snapped, her green eyes blazing with absolute defiance. "And you are not dying today, Vincent Romano. I didn't sacrifice my entire career and my freedom just to watch you bleed out on a hardwood floor." She pressed harder on the wound, causing Vincent to groan in pain. "Stay with me." In the living room, a final deafening exchange of gunfire echoed, followed by a sickening thud. Then, silence. Matteo stepped into the study, his face battered and his suit ruined, but alive. "Clear," he panted, dropping an empty magazine. He looked down at Vincent, who was rapidly losing consciousness. "Is he?" "He's going into hypovolemic shock," Neve said, her voice entirely devoid of panic now. The surgeon had fully taken over. "The shrapnel nicked a vein. I need my trauma kit from the East Wing, and I need you to prep the surgical suite. We have less than 10 minutes before his organs start shutting down." Matteo didn't hesitate. He sprinted down the hall. Neve looked down at the feared Mafia Boss, who was now completely at her mercy. His eyes fluttered shut. "Vincent," she whispered, leaning down until her lips brushed against his ear. "If you die on me, I swear to God I will bring you back just to kill you myself." With a surge of adrenaline, Neve grabbed him by the shoulders, preparing to drag the devil back from the brink of hell for the second time. She realized in that terrifying moment that she wasn't just saving a patient anymore. She was saving the man she was falling dangerously, hopelessly in love with. Adrenaline masked the agonizing burn in Neve's muscles as she and Matteo hoisted Vincent onto the sterile operating table in the East Wing's state-of-the-art medical suite. The room was a stark contrast to the ruined living room. Bright, clinically immaculate, and stocked with millions of dollars in trauma equipment. Right now, it was the only thing standing between the Mafia Boss and a body bag. "Start a rapid infusion of O-negative," Neve ordered, her voice devoid of panic, snapping into the cold, calculated rhythm of a trauma surgeon. She threw on a fresh, sterile gown and snapped latex gloves over her shaking hands. "Push 50 milligrams of propofol and 100 of succinylcholine. I need him intubated immediately." Matteo, acting once again as her makeshift anesthesiologist, moved with surprising efficiency. He injected the milky white propofol into the IV line. Vincent's dark, pain-filled eyes locked onto Neve's for a fleeting second, before rolling back as the paralytic took hold. "He's under," Matteo confirmed, stepping back to let her work. Neve grabbed a scalpel and went to work on the jagged wooden shrapnel protruding from Vincent's right flank. The wood had splintered upon impact, turning a simple puncture wound into a complex labyrinth of debris deeply embedded in his muscle tissue. "Suction," she commanded, grabbing a pair of DeBakey forceps. She meticulously extracted the larger shards, her eyes glued to the monitors. His blood pressure was dangerously low, 80/50. The shrapnel had narrowly missed the kidney, but had lacerated the renal vein, causing massive retroperitoneal hemorrhaging. "He's losing too much," Matteo said, staring at the vitals. The steady beep of the heart monitor was frantic, a digital scream for help. "I know," Neve gritted through her teeth. Pass me the bovie. I need to cauterize the smaller bleeders before I can repair the vein, and push a gram of tranexamic acid to help his blood clot. The acrid smell of burning flesh filled the sterile suite as Nevaeh used the electrocautery tool. Her hands, previously trembling with terror, were now absolute stone. She was entirely in her element, fighting the Reaper with steel and synthetic thread. She found the lacerated vein, clamped it off, and began the delicate process of suturing the delicate vascular tissue. Time distorted, minutes stretched into hours. Every alarm from the Baxter 4-pump sent a fresh wave of terror through Mateo, but Nevaeh remained entirely unflinching. She was a maestro conducting a symphony of survival. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bleeding stopped. The cavity was clear. Vitals are stabilizing, Mateo breathed out, sinking against the stainless steel cabinets, utterly spent. Pressure is coming up. Heart rate is settling. Nevaeh didn't celebrate. She methodically closed the wound, applying the final staples with mechanical precision. Only when the last sterile dressing was taped down did the adrenaline finally crash. Her knees buckled. Before she could hit the floor, Mateo caught her by the arm, steadying her against the surgical table. "Easy, Doc, I got you." "I need to wash my hands," Nevaeh whispered hoarsely, staring blindly at the crimson staining her surgical gown. She stripped off the gown and gloves, moving to the scrub sink like a ghost. She turned the water as hot as she could stand it, scrubbing her skin until it was raw. As the water ran clear down the drain, the reality of what had just happened crashed over her. She was no longer just a doctor trapped by circumstance. She had willingly risked her own life in a firefight to drag the head of the Romano Syndicate to safety. She was thoroughly, irrevocably compromised. 12 hours later, the penthouse was heavily fortified. Dozens of armed enforcers patrolled the halls, and a specialized cleanup crew had already erased the evidence of the brutal firefight in the foyer. Inside the medical suite, the only sound was the rhythmic hum of the ventilator. Nevaeh sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside the bed, her head resting on the edge of the mattress, her fingers lightly resting against Vincent's wrist to monitor his pulse. A heavy, warm hand slowly covered hers. Nevaeh gasped, lifting her head. Vincent's eyes were open, heavy with narcotics, but burning with that familiar, intense fire. The breathing tube had been removed an hour prior, leaving his voice raspy and weak. "You didn't run," he murmured, his thumb gently tracing the knuckles of her hand. "You were bleeding to death on your expensive rug," Nevaeh replied, trying to pull her hand away, but his grip, though weak, was relentlessly stubborn. "I couldn't exactly leave you there." "You could have," Vincent countered, his dark eyes searching hers. "When the shooting started, you had a clear path to the service stairwell. Mateo told me. You didn't take it. You came into the crossfire for me." "I took an oath," Nevaeh deflected, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Stop hiding behind your oath, Nevaeh," Vincent whispered, his voice vibrating with a dangerous, intoxicating gravity. He pulled her hand closer to his chest, right over his beating heart. "You didn't risk a bullet for a patient. You risked it for me." Nevaeh stared at him, unable to form a lie. The terrifying truth was that she had stopped seeing him as a monster the moment he stepped in front of a shotgun blast to protect her. "You are reckless, violent, and completely impossible. And you?" Vincent smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips. "Are the only thing keeping me tied to this earth. I told you before. I don't let what's mine go." Nevaeh's breath hitched as he reached up, tangling his fingers in her dark hair, pulling her face down toward his. The kiss was desperate, bruising, and tasted of antiseptic and iron. It was a complete surrender. Nevaeh closed her eyes, letting the last remnants of her old life burn away as she kissed the devil back. 48 hours later, the air inside the Romano penthouse was thick with impending war. Vincent, defying every medical directive Nevaeh had screamed at him, was out of bed. He was confined to a leather wheelchair in his reinforced study, but his physical limitations did nothing to diminish the terrifying aura of command he projected. He was dressed in a dark tailored suit, a blanket draped over his legs to hide the heavy bandages, reviewing tactical maps spread across his massive oak desk. Nevaeh stood in the corner, her arms crossed, glaring at him with a mixture of professional fury and deep, unspoken affection. "His white blood cell count is elevated," Nevaeh said sharply to Mateo, who was standing at attention by the door. "If he pushes himself into a stress-induced fever, the antibiotics will fail. Put him back in bed." "You try putting him in bed, Doc," Mateo muttered, looking entirely exhausted. "I value my life." Vincent didn't look up from the blueprints of the Calumet River shipping yards. "I have rested enough. Liam O'Bannon just tried to assassinate me in my own home. If I stay in that bed, the city will think I'm weak. When a king is bleeding, the jackals circle. I need to strike back tonight." "You are not a king, you are a patient," Nevaeh snapped, marching over to the desk and slamming her hand down on the blueprints. "And if your renal vein ruptures because you decided to play warlord, you will be a corpse." Vincent finally looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The room instantly fell silent. Mateo awkwardly cleared his throat and stepped out into the hallway, closing the heavy oak doors behind him, leaving them entirely alone. Vincent reached out, grabbing Nevaeh's waist and pulling her effortlessly into his lap, ignoring her shocked gasp and her frantic attempts to avoid jarring his injuries. "Vincent, your stitches are fine," he murmured, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent like it was oxygen. "You worry too much, Dr. Brown." "Someone has to," she breathed, her hands resting tentatively on his broad shoulders. The anger melted away, replaced by the terrifying realization of how deeply she cared for this ruthless man. "O'Bannon knows you're alive now. He won't stop." Vincent pulled back, his expression turning cold and lethal. "I know, which is why I'm ending him tonight. But there is a complication." Nevaeh frowned. "What complication?" "Mateo intercepted a communication from the Irish mob," Vincent explained, his jaw tightening. "O'Bannon didn't just find the penthouse codes through Arthur Mitchell. He had a secondary source, someone who knew exactly who you were and exactly where I was taken that first night." Nevaeh's blood ran cold. "Dr. Caldwell." Vincent nodded slowly. "O'Bannon's men grabbed Caldwell trying to cross the Canadian border yesterday. He's singing like a canary. He gave them everything. My injuries, the penthouse location, and most importantly, your name." Panic seized Nevaeh's chest. "If they have Caldwell, they know I was the one who operated on you. They know I saved you." "You are a target now, Nevaeh," Vincent said, his voice deadly serious. "Liam O'Bannon is a sadistic bastard. He won't just come for me. He will try to take you to punish me. He knows that you are the architect of his failure." Nevaeh stood up from his lap, pacing the room, running her hands through her hair. The reality of the underworld was crashing down on her all over again. There was no going back to the hospital. There was no quiet life waiting for her. She was marked for death by a cartel. "So what do we do?" Nevaeh asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror gripping her spine. Vincent watched her, admiring the steel in her spine. Most women would be in hysterics. Nevaeh was calculating survival. "I am sending you away," Vincent stated, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "I have a private jet fueled and waiting at a private airstrip in Rockford. Mateo has a secure compound in Corsica. You will be guarded by 20 of my best men. You will stay there until I bring Liam O'Bannon's head to you on a silver platter." "No." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "Nevaeh, this is not a negotiation." I said no," Nevaeh fired back, stepping directly up to his wheelchair, her green eyes blazing with defiance. "I am not running away to hide on an island while you start a gang war with internal bleeding. You need me here." "I cannot protect you while I'm at war," Vincent roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. The sudden movement caused him to wince sharply, his hand instinctively going to his side. Nevaeh immediately dropped to her knees beside him, her medical instincts overriding the argument. She gently pressed her hand against his side, checking for fresh bleeding. "You see?" Nevaeh whispered fiercely, looking up into his pained eyes. "You're falling apart. You are a brilliant, terrifying boss, Vincent, but medically you are a disaster. If you go to war tonight, you will need a surgeon. If I leave, you die. And I refuse to let you die." Vincent stared down at her, the frustration in his eyes warring with a profound, consuming affection. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "If you stay," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, dangerous whisper, "there is no exit strategy, Nevaeh. You will no longer just be my doctor. The streets will know you are mine. You will be the Donna of the Romano family. Every enemy I have will become your enemy." "I know," Neve replied without a single ounce of hesitation. She leaned up, pressing a fierce, resolute kiss to his lips. "I stopped being just your doctor the moment I picked up that scalpel at St. Jude's. Now, tell me what the plan is." Vincent let out a dark, booming laugh that echoed off the mahogany walls, a sound completely devoid of fear. He looked at Nevaeh not just as a lover, but as an equal. A queen to sit beside him in the blood-soaked throne of Chicago. "Call Matteo back in," Vincent commanded, a lethal glint returning to his eyes. "We aren't just going to hit Liam O'Bannon. We are going to wipe his entire bloodline off the map." Heavy clouds smothered the moonlight over the abandoned warehouses of the Calumet River shipping yards. The freezing Chicago wind howled through the rusted skeletons of old cranes, carrying the scent of stagnant water and impending violence. This was the neutral ground chosen for the parley, a graveyard of industry, perfectly suited to become a graveyard for men. Inside a heavily armored mobile command center parked half a mile away, Neve Brown stared at a bank of glowing monitors. Her hands gripped the edge of the steel console so tightly her knuckles were translucent. Attached to Vincent's chest, hidden beneath his Kevlar vest and tailored suit, was a state-of-the-art biometric telemetry patch. Neve watched his electrocardiogram tracing in real time. His resting heart rate was remarkably steady at 65 beats per minute, a testament to the ice water running through the Mafia Boss's veins. "Sniper teams are in position on cranes 4 and 7. Matteo's voice crackled through the encrypted radio channel filling the van. "O'Bannon's convoy is approaching from the South Access Road. 6 vehicles, heavily armed." Nevaeh pressed the microphone button on the console. "Matteo, his blood pressure is holding, but if he engages in close-quarters combat, the sheer kinetic shock will rupture his renal vein. You have to drop them before they get within 50 yards. "Copy that, Doc," Matteo replied, his voice grim. "We're not letting them get close." Through the van's external optical cameras, Nevaeh watched the scene unfold. Vincent sat in a specialized tactical wheelchair in the center of the loading dock, illuminated by the harsh, glaring beams of 2 Romano Syndicate SUVs. He looked frail, draped in a heavy wool blanket, his head bowed slightly as if the effort of staying upright was too much. It was a masterful performance. Every ounce of his lethal predatory instinct was perfectly masked by the illusion of a dying king. 6 black Lincoln Navigators roared onto the dock, their tires screeching against the wet concrete. The doors flew open, and over 24 Irish cartel soldiers poured out, leveling automatic rifles at Vincent's meager guard detail. Liam O'Bannon stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was a towering, viciously scarred man in a camel overcoat, smoking a thick cigar. 2 of his men dragged a battered, whimpering figure from the trunk of the car and threw him onto the wet pavement. Neve gasped, leaning closer to the monitor. It was Dr. Harrison Caldwell. His face was a pulp of purple bruises, and his hands were bound with zip ties. "Look at the great Vincent Romano," Liam sneered, his voice booming across the empty shipping yard. "Reduced to a cripple sitting in the rain. You should have died on that operating table, Vincent. You would have saved your men a slaughter." Vincent slowly lifted his head. Through the grainy feed of the camera, Nevaeh saw his eyes. They were obsidian black, completely devoid of fear. "You talk too much, Liam. You always did. It's why you'll never hold this city." Liam laughed, a cruel barking sound. He drew a polished silver .45 caliber pistol and pressed it to the back of Caldwell's head. "I brought you a present, Vincent. The coward who told me everything. He told me about the little surgeon who stitched you up. As soon as I finish you, I'm sending a team to the penthouse to drag her down here. I think I'll keep her." A sudden sharp spike registered on Nevaeh's monitor. Vincent's heart rate jumped to 90 beats per minute. A silent, terrifying fury radiated from him. Liam had made the fatal mistake of threatening the one thing Vincent truly guarded. You aren't going anywhere near her, Vincent said softly, his voice carrying a lethal acoustic weight. And who's going to stop me? Liam mocked, pulling the hammer back on his pistol. You? You can't even stand up. I don't need to stand, Vincent replied, a cold, shark-like smile spreading across his face. I just needed you all in one place. Vincent kicked the heavy wool blanket off his lap. Hidden beneath it was a compact, fully automatic Heckler & Koch MP7. In a fraction of a second, the illusion of the dying man vanished. Execute! Vincent roared into his concealed earpiece. Before Liam could pull the trigger on Caldwell, a high-caliber round from Mateo's sniper team vaporized the cartel leader's shoulder, spinning him violently to the ground. Complete pandemonium erupted. The Romano soldiers hidden inside the shipping containers kicked open the metal doors, catching the O'Bannon crew in a devastating crossfire. The docks lit up with the strobe light flashes of muzzle fire. The deafening roar of automatic weapons echoed like thunder across the river. In the command van, Neve's eyes were glued to the telemetry monitor. Vincent's heart rate skyrocketed to 140. He wasn't staying in the wheelchair. Despite his agonizing injuries, Vincent rolled out of the chair, taking cover behind the reinforced engine block of his SUV. He was firing with one hand, his other hand pressed tightly against his freshly sutured abdomen. His blood pressure is dropping, Neve yelled into the radio, panic seizing her throat as the digital numbers plummeted. He's bleeding internally. Mateo, you have to get him out of there right now. We're pinned down by heavy suppression fire from their rear vehicles. Mateo shouted over the radio, the sound of bullets pinging against steel deafening in the background. I can't reach him. Nevaeh didn't hesitate. The clinical detached surgeon vanished, completely replaced by a woman who refused to let the man she loved die in the dirt. She slammed her hand down on the van's emergency release button, throwing the armored door open. Grabbing her heavy red trauma bag, Nevaeh sprinted out into the freezing rain. Gunfire tore through the air around her, tearing chunks of concrete from the ground, but she didn't stop. She navigated the battlefield with the same reckless precision she used in the operating room, sliding behind the Romano SUV just as a spray of bullets shattered the windows above her. Vincent was slumped against the rear tire, his face ashen, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood was rapidly soaking through his white dress shirt, turning it a brilliant, terrifying crimson. He looked up, his eyes widening in pure shock as Nevaeh dropped to her knees beside him. Are you insane? Vincent choked out, coughing up a fine mist of blood. I told you to stay in the van. I told you I don't follow your orders, Nevaeh screamed over the roar of a nearby explosion. She ripped his shirt open, exposing the surgical site. The violent movement had torn 3 internal sutures. He was hemorrhaging. Nevaeh didn't have a sterile suite. She didn't have an anesthesiologist. She only had seconds. She jammed her gloved hand directly into the wound, bypassing the muscle tissue to apply direct manual pressure to the bleeding vessel deep within his abdomen. Vincent let out a blinding roar of agony, his head throwing back against the tire, his body convulsing in shock. Look at me, Nevaeh yelled, her face inches from his, tears of desperation mixing with the freezing rain. Look at me, Vincent. You promised me the world. You do not get to die on me before you deliver it. Across the loading dock, Liam O'Bannon, bleeding heavily from his shattered shoulder, dragged himself out from behind a wrecked Lincoln. With his good arm, he raised his pistol, aiming it unsteadily at Nevaeh's back. Vincent saw the movement. With a sheer, terrifying exertion of willpower, he fought through the paralyzing pain of Nevaeh's hand inside his abdomen. He raised his MP7 with his trembling right arm and unleashed a sustained burst of fire. The rounds tore through Liam's chest, dropping the Irish boss to the wet concrete permanently. The gunfire slowly ceased. The surviving O'Bannon soldiers threw down their weapons, raising their hands in surrender to the encroaching Romano enforcers. Mateo ran over to the SUV, sliding in the blood and rain, his eyes wide with horror as he saw Neve holding Vincent's ruptured artery closed with her bare hand. Get the medevac chopper here, Neve screamed at Mateo, her eyes locked onto Vincent's fading gaze. We have 3 minutes. Vincent reached up with a blood-slicked hand, his fingers tangling weakly in Nevier's rain-soaked hair. A faint, triumphant smile touched his pale lips. "I told you, I don't let what's mine go." He slipped into unconsciousness, leaving Neva holding onto his life by a thread in the middle of a slaughterhouse. 6 months later, the Chicago skyline glittered under the clear, crisp autumn sky. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Romano Syndicate's newly acquired high-rise in the Loop, the city looked peaceful. It was a perfectly orchestrated lie, built on the bones of Liam O'Bannon and absolute, terrifying order. Neve Brown walked out of the private elevator, her heels clicking authoritatively against the polished marble floor. She wore a sharply tailored emerald green Tom Ford suit, her dark hair pulled back into a sleek professional twist. She carried a leather briefcase in one hand, and in the other, a tablet displaying the architectural blueprints for a brand new $70 million private trauma hospital. The heavy mahogany doors to the executive boardroom swung open before she even reached them. 2 heavily armed guards, dressed in impeccable suits, bowed their heads slightly as she passed. Inside, the most powerful capos, money launderers, and fixers in the Midwest sat around a massive oval table. At the head of the table sat Vincent Romano. He was fully healed. The brutal scars mapping his chest and abdomen were the only remaining evidence of his descent into hell. He radiated a quiet, absolute supremacy. The moment Nevaeh entered the room, the conversation ceased entirely. The men at the table didn't just respect her as the boss's woman, they feared her. They knew her as the Donna, the brilliant, ruthless architect of the syndicate's new, untouchable medical infrastructure, and the woman who had held Vincent's heart together with her bare hands. Vincent stood up, a slow, predatory smile warming his dark eyes as he looked at her. He didn't care that the most dangerous men in the city were watching. He walked over to her, wrapping a powerful arm around her waist and pulling her flush against his chest. "Dr. Brown," Vincent murmured, kissing the side of her neck, ignoring the slight clearing of throats from the table. "You're late." "I was finalizing the acquisition of the medical supply ports in Seattle," Neva replied smoothly, leaning into his touch, completely comfortable in the apex predator's den. She set her tablet on the table, projecting the blueprints onto the glass screen in the center of the room. "The Romano Foundation's new hospital will officially be completely off the grid, fully funded, and immune to federal oversight by December." Matteo, sitting to Vincent's right, raised his glass of bourbon in a silent toast to her sheer efficiency. Vincent looked at the blueprints, then back down at Nevaeh. The underworld was completely theirs. No rivals remained. No threats lingered in the shadows. He had kept his promise. He had given her the world, bending the entire criminal ecosystem to ensure her absolute safety and power. "Gentlemen," Vincent said, his voice echoing off the glass walls, rich with absolute authority. "The meeting is adjourned. My wife and I have private matters to discuss." The room emptied in less than 30 seconds. When the doors clicked shut, locking them in the silent, sprawling boardroom overlooking the city, Vincent turned Navy around to face him. He reached up, gently unpinning her hair, letting the dark locks cascade down over her shoulders. "You look beautiful when you're orchestrating organized crime," Vincent whispered, his hands sliding down to rest on her hips. Neve smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck. "It requires a lot of the same skills as surgery, Vincent. You identify the rot, you isolate it, and you cut it out cleanly." "And what happens when you find something worth saving?" he asked, his dark eyes locking onto hers, burning with the same intense fire that had terrified and captivated her in that underground clinic so many months ago. "You stitch it up, Neve murmured, pulling him down until their lips were inches apart. "And you never let it go." He kissed her, a consuming, possessive embrace that sealed their fate in blood and gold. She had lost her career, her reputation, and her normal life, only to forge an empire alongside the devil himself. And as she looked out over the glittering city of Chicago from the pinnacle of the underworld, Nevaeh knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single thing. "Did this thrilling medical mafia romance keep you on the edge of your seat?" If you loved watching Nevaeh trade her surgical scrubs for a crown in the underworld, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this story with your friends who crave heart-pounding drama, dark romance, and fierce heroines who take charge of their own fate. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a pulse-racing chapter. Drop a comment below, telling us what you thought of Neva and Vincent's fiery dynamic. See you in the next video.